This is Kentucky Afield Radio. This is Ron Rohde, Kentucky Afield's first host back in 1953. Now, I'm proud to present Charlie Bagley.
It's common to cross paths with wildlife. Birds, squirrels, there's no real interaction between them and us compared to a deer we would hunt, chickens we raise, or even our pet dog or cat. But what if a wild animal needed emergency care? What if one took up residence in our attic? And what if Junior finds a small animal and wants to make it a pet? We go inside outdoors with a few facts on incidental contact. Next on Kentucky Afield Radio.
I didn't know when I woke up that morning that birds would stop singing or the sun would stop shining.
Alex Audie, 13-year-old survivor of a collision with a drunk boater.
By all accounts, I shouldn't be here. But before that first scream or the care of the first responders, the first thing that saved my life was my life jacket.
Life jackets.
They're like little angels. They lift you up.
Kentucky boating and conservation officers remind you.
Your life jacket's got your back.
In the news, whales have been spotted in Kentucky waters. We have an expert standing by on the water's edge.
There goes the bobber. Set the hook.
Daddy, it's a whale.
Way to go, buddy.
Childlike wonder for the outdoors. It still exists. Where to go, what to take, and how to get started are waiting at the Kentucky Fish and Wildlife website, fw.ky.gov. Take a kid fishing. Don't let the opportunity get away. Welcome to Kentucky Afield Radio. This is Charlie Baglin. We have seen since youth movies and stories and TV shows about wild animals and humans that have bonded in unnatural ways. The first likely was Noah and the Ark. In more modern times, Eddie Murphy's movie, Dr. Dolittle, where a doctor discovers that he can communicate with animals. People are fascinated by wildlife and their proximity to wildlife. The closer we get, the more thrilling the experience. We call this show Incidental Contact, and just like the sports term would imply, this is contact that's not really a part of the game plan. Today, I have 4 guests to address the ideas of holding wildlife as pets, injured and seemingly abandoned wildlife, for which we feel compelled to render some level of care. Specialty situations requiring permits. And lastly, incidental contact with wildlife that chooses to make your home their home. First, we look at an age-old favorite, wildlife pets. Dr. Iga Stasiak is here, and welcome back.
Thanks, Charlie. It's great to be here.
When I was a kid, and I bet this happened to you as it has to everybody, you pick up a frog or you pick up a turtle, you put it in your pocket, you go home and say, Mama, can I keep it?
Certainly when I was younger, I did the same thing. In fact, we had a red-eared slider named Raphael.
That's a turtle.
Yes.
Yeah.
But we weren't aware, I wasn't aware at the time that it was an invasive species. There's a lot of problems with taking pets into captivity and, the issues we talked about not being able to maybe provide them with the type of conditions that they need, but also the risk of later releasing those animals into the wild. Some of them have really small territories, and so they cannot be moved. Box turtles, for instance, they won't thrive in a new area. And there's disease implications as well. So when you're moving an animal from one spot to another, you're potentially moving disease around.
There's somewhere we have to draw a line. If you live on a farm and you have domestic animals, horses, pigs, they're domesticated, but they're not pets, yet they're not wild.
Domesticated species have been around for tens of thousands of years, and that process has taken a really long time. So it takes many, many generations for a species to be considered domesticated. I think dogs were the first species to ever have been domesticated, and that was over 10,000 years ago. The difference is, so domestic species were basically created by man to help us with various needs around the farm, plowing, herding. In some ways, they provide us a service. Wild animals are not that way. Wild animals exist in a natural setting. They exhibit normal, natural behaviors. They're able to fend for themselves and handle all the different elements out in the environment. Certainly, they have not gone through that process where we've selectively bred animals for certain traits like we have with our domestic species like horses and livestock.
So at some point, somebody said, this animal would be of service to me or to my farm or as a guardian at the gate. At some point, animals were wild. Yeah, after all, we love thoroughbred horses in this state. But at some point, they were wild. There are wild Mustangs. Right. There are zebras. The point I'm trying to make is somebody had to make this decision to tame the wild.
That's right. One thing to keep in mind is that this has happened or evolved over so many generations and thousands of years, and the process to some extent is still ongoing. To take a wild animal into captivity is not the same thing, and even, having bred wild animals in captivity for several generations doesn't take that wildness out of them. So those species are still adapted to their natural environment. They still seem to thrive in many cases much better in a natural environment. And they have really complex social, mental, nutritional needs that we just simply cannot manage in a captive setting.
There's a classification out there called feral.
So feral animals are essentially domesticated animals that are released into the wild and to some degree revert back to their natural state. So they become predators, they're hunting.
Wild pigs, for example.
Right, and they become established. And in many cases, they become a nuisance and displace a lot of native wildlife, compete for resources. So this becomes a problem for native wildlife populations. Cats, for instance, manage quite well in the outdoors, and they're actually responsible for die-offs of billions of birds across the United States. There's been a lot of studies out recently, and this is a significant concern. Somehow they're able to fend for themselves. That doesn't make them wild animals, and certainly doesn't create space for them in a wild setting. It really does a lot of damage to the natural environment.
I've heard that pigs, if you can keep them corralled, make great pets. I've never had one. My wife told me just this morning, skunks make great pets. You get rid of that scent gland. And I've held a skunk. They are nice little animals. It seems like you're crossing a line when you take a skunk or a wild animal, a raccoon or deer. Right. They don't make good pets, or do they?
They don't. Wild animals can become tame. You can develop relationships with wild animals. We certainly have wild animals in zoological institutions. They're capable of a lot of the same array of emotions that our own, dogs and cats and ourselves are capable of. That doesn't mean that they make good pets. There's concerns about disease transmission. So here in Kentucky, we have skunk variant rabies present. Some of these animals can incubate rabies for many months before they become symptomatic. It's a disease that's fatal to humans, so there's, inherent risk there. There's all kinds of parasitic diseases that you can potentially get from wild animals. Importantly, these animals are not adapted to live in a captive setting. They're extremely stressed. They're not accustomed to the noise and all the elements living amongst us. They have complex social structures in the wild, and you're basically taking them out of that natural setting, putting them in a very artificial environment. And while that animal may seem to have some type of relationship with you, it's not necessarily a good environment for the animal. You may have a difficult time meeting their nutritional needs. And really the principle and the foundation on which wildlife agencies operate, and that is that wild animals belong in the wild so that we can preserve them for future generations. And that's the underlying principle behind the public trust doctrine. The idea that wildlife are a natural resource, just like our rivers and streams and mountains, and they belong to all of us. They don't belong to an individual person. They belong to all of us. By taking an animal in that's intended to be a wild animal, you're taking it away from the rest of the public. You're taking it away from its natural setting. You're undermining the value of that resource for everybody.
People might say, well, this deer came into my yard. He approached me. But should you discourage this activity with animals?
I'd say that's definitely a good idea. We have a lot of problems when people feed wildlife or take wildlife in. So wild species can become habituated to people. And of course, they're searching for food. Oftentimes they'd like an easy handout. Same goes for feeding of ducks in a park, for instance. But what can happen is these animals can start to rely on people for food, and that can pose a danger to the animal and to the person. Sometimes they'll become aggressive. So wild geese, for instance, Canada geese, often fed in public parks, around their nesting season, they can become quite aggressive, and their wings are strong enough, to break a person's hand. Deer can become a nuisance. They can be found around urban areas, can be more likely to be hit by a car. And this happens because people are putting food out for these animals. They're becoming habituated. And when that happens, oftentimes, we have no choice. We have to put those animals down, and that's not really what we want to do.
It has been interesting. Dr. Stasiak, thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Charlie.
Up next, a halfway house for injured wildlife. Wildlife Rehabbers as our show on Incidental Contact continues. You're listening to Kentucky Afield Radio. Charlie Baglin back on Kentucky Afield Radio. Today we're looking at different ways we have incidental contact with the wildlife of our state. Not casual, like a frog in your garden, and not direct, like dove hunting, but contact that you might define as crossing a line, a gray area in a green world, if you will. And it's conflicting sometimes. You and I need medical care. Our dogs and cats and cattle need veterinary care. But wild animals, they live outside year-round, cold weather, hot weather, rainy weather, snow, pollen. Who tends to their needs? Most commonly, it's a lady called Mother Nature. But when it goes beyond that, we turn to someone like my next guest, Jenna Peterson. She's in Paducah at Tiny Paws and Claws Wildlife Rehabbers. And Jenna, welcome.
Well, thank you.
I got to ask you, what is a typical scenario of how wild animals come into your care?
Well, there are a variety. Most of the times we'll get calls in the middle of the night. Somebody is crazy excited and upset because they just hit a possum, or they think that they did a rollover on a squirrel. People are panicked. They don't want to do harm to the animal, but they want to see that it gets taken care of.
So chances are it's going to be hit, it's going to be injured, in need of care.
Yes.
Sometimes, though, I guess you'll find people who find baby animals, maybe a fawn deer that's been, it seems like its mother has gone away, or it's abandoned.
That's a common misconception because baby fawns, they are taught by their mothers. It's instinct. They stay in place. They are spotted. They camouflage easily, and their mother is not that far away. The best thing to do when they see a baby fawn, and we tell them when they call us, put it back.
Just put it back where you found it.
Put the baby back where you found it because Mama's watching.
What animals have you had in your care there at Tiny Paws and Claws over the years? What animals?
Recently we had a bobcat. That was our local bobcat from Ledbetter, Kentucky. We always get raccoons, skunks. I absolutely love skunks. We get a lot of squirrel calls. Baby squirrels, injured squirrels. We get a lot of opossum calls, and we do a lot of bunnies as well. Recently, last year, we also got a melanistic red fox.
Sounds like a variety. You say you love skunks. How do you deal with the scent gland?
When you get them in and they're a few weeks old, you're nursing them. They're in an incubator. You just tuck their tail, and you feed them with a syringe and a miracle nipple, and they get to know your scent. And if you talk to them, most people don't like to talk to them. They're afraid of them. But they get used to my scent. They get used to my voice because there's other animals around as well. And they get comfortable. If they startle, yes, that little tail will go up and they'll do their little puff. But it's not that bad until they get older.
Gotcha.
The interesting thing is that about 6 to 8 weeks, these guys can spray up to 25 feet with accuracy and precision and can shoot up to 7 times in concession.
Holy cow.
Oh, yeah.
I hope they're not aiming toward you. So if you have all of this variety of animals that come into your care, where in the world do you get the training to be able to care for every animal? And it seems like there may be some that are beyond your capabilities. Is that true?
Yes, we don't know. We go online. We'll do a lot of research. We'll call sanctuaries. We'll call other rehabbers who have specialized in various animals.
So if an animal comes into your care, how long generally do they stay? What kind of time frame do you look at typically?
Well, it varies from species to species. For example, baby skunks will come in usually April and May. And they're with us until they reach about 2 pounds. And then we're free to release them. That can take about 8 to 16 weeks.
Oh, so they're going to be there for a while.
Oh, yeah.
Well, a natural question would be, do they imprint on you, and how do you keep from this happening?
Some animals can imprint on you. However, that's going to happen no matter what you do when it comes to rehabbing. You can minimize contact, which is what we generally try to do. We make sure that their enclosures are similar to what their natural environment would be. We try not to interact with them too much prior to release. And we don't do soft releases here. We have to do a hard release. For example, raccoons, we'll teach them how to fish. We'll buy minnows, and we'll put prawns in there, and we'll let them fish for crawdads and minnows so they get to know what's out there. We begin feeding them natural foods that are found in the wild, whether it's various barks, nuts, berries. We're out there gathering and collecting a lot of this stuff as well. So when we let them go, we know that they're going to make it on their own.
Now, sometimes animals have a diet that we would just never conceive of. Hair and bone. It's kind of hard to beat what Mother Nature provides. And how does a wildlife rehabilitator actually know what an animal should be eating? And where do they find it?
Well, a lot of this we learn in our classes through the IWRC. And then that's all academics and medical math and learning the percentages of how to care for an animal. But the only way to really do it is by hands-on. For example, possums. Some rehabbers will go out and scrape up roadkill to feed to their possums. They love it.
That's what they eat in the wild.
That's what they eat.
That's their role in the grand scheme of things.
And that's the best way to teach them. That's the best way to rehab them.
And is it just you and your husband that do this? Mm-hmm. Do you have a volunteer staff?
No, but we do. Well, kind of. Only recently. We've had, I've got a lady by the name of Hannah Milby that moved here from Georgia, and she's currently going through the permit process, so she'll help out. I have some people up at the Paducah Community College, and they'll come down here and they bring donations. They bring stuff for the animals, seeds, fruits, granola. It's amazing. They all offer to help. They all offer to help clean out enclosures. It's wonderful to have that help. The first couple of years, we did it all ourselves, and we both worked full-time at the time.
I'm wondering, what is the philosophy that a wildlife rehabilitator would have about animals that exist in utter abundance, such as raccoons and deer? Are they better left in the care of Mother Nature? And as you're answering that, let me ask you, is there a better place for your talent, say with songbirds or endangered species?
Some rehabbers stick to one particular species, whether it's just raccoons or just squirrels.
It's human nature to want to provide care.
Yes, and that's kind of what we do. And in the last several years, we've done it just the two of us. And last year, when I put our report together for the state, I'm just like, oh my gosh, we got in over 320 animals through the course of spring through fall.
I was very surprised when we started the conversation that I said, who pays you for your services? And you said, oh, nobody does. It's not like you can just send a bill to the county or to the state or to the local vet. This is all done out of the goodness of your heart. Is that pretty much the case with every wildlife rehabilitator in the state?
Yes, it is. In any state, it is strictly a volunteer. We just feel that we're doing a service. For us, in general, we feel that we're providing a service for our community.
So, Jenna, what is your simple advice to someone who wonders, should they render care to an animal, should they leave it alone, or should they come knocking on your door?
I would say depending on the situation. If it's a baby, an eyes-closed baby, and they see that it's laying at the base of a tree, and if they feel compassion towards that animal, the best thing I would say to them, first see if they can find any signs of mama being there. If so, our first goal is to reunite that baby with its natural mother. If not, I tell them, don't do anything to them. If you want them to have help, I say get them, keep them warm in a dark, quiet place, and call us. Don't feed them, don't do anything. Because a lot of times you'll do more harm than good. They don't know if the baby's dehydrated, then they might want to give it some milk. Well, milk can kill it. Regular cow's milk, it can make them very sick. And if it's dehydrated and they feed them some sort of solid food, it can shut down their entire system. So we tell them to contact a rehabber first. We'll ask a lot of questions. The questions may sound crazy, but we have a reason for asking. We want to get a quick history on this animal. And then we can move forward. We'll come and get the animal. We'll have you meet us somewhere, whatever it takes. But our number one concern is, let's try to reunite this animal with its natural mother first.
Jenna, it sounds like good work you do, and I appreciate every night that you lose sleep when somebody's knocking on your door with an injured critter.
This time of year, we don't have much sleep. We're up every 2 to 4 hours nursing various babies.
Jenna, thanks a million.
Well, thank you.
Incidental contact. Crossing paths with the wildlife of our state that's clearly a step beyond the norm. Pets, nuisance wildlife, animals in need of emergency care, and next up, specially permitted animals, such as captive wildlife in schools, nature centers. Plus, our fishing report is standing by. Stay tuned. You're listening to Kentucky Afield Radio. Bagland back, Kentucky Afield Radio. If you like this show, would like to hear it again, put it on Facebook or email the link. Easily found those links. Go to our Facebook page. You can find us there. Just put Kentucky Afield Radio in the search box. Like us if you will. Also, we're on YouTube. Put in Kentucky Afield Radio. And every week on iTunes, we are a podcast. More on incidental contact with our state's wildlife. First up, our fishing report.
Hi, this is John Williams with the Fishing Report from Southeast Kentucky. At Lake Cumberland tailwaters, our krill perch report good catches of both rainbow trout and brook trout. Garlic-flavored power bait seems to be the best bait, also being caught on small spinners. So lots of stalker fish and also some rainbow trout in the slot. Best days seem to be when the flows are pretty low. Elsewhere in the district, the walleye night bite's still going on. Heard some good reports from Del Hollow, also from Laurel and Cumberland on surface baits or subsurface baits. Seems like steep banks or bluff walls are the best areas, mainly main lake areas. And elsewhere in the district, channel catfish, we're stocking Brickyard Ponds in Barberville. That's a Finn's Lake. Great bank access all the way around that area, so give that a try. As always, good luck and be safe.
This is Rob Rold in the Northwestern Fishery District. Rough River Lake and Nolin River Lake are both temperature-wise in the mid-70s. Rains over the Memorial Day weekend have caused both lakes to come up a bit. Nolin is 2.5 feet over summer pool. Rough River Lake is 6 feet over summer pool. Bass fishing is actually picking up at both reservoirs. Most of the fish are holding somewhere around the 15-20 foot range. Crappie fishing is finally starting to pick up again using pearl-colored 16th-ounce jigs and fishing them over brush piles in the 10 to 15-foot depth range, which is where most of the crappie are holding. Peabody Wildlife Management Area, as well as Lake Malone, bluegill, and red ear, both doing really well. Free fishing weekend, it is June 2nd and 3rd, so take advantage of it to introduce family or friends to our great sport of fishing.
In western Kentucky, down at Kentucky and Barkley Lakes, fishing has really picked up. The water has come back down to summer pool. The water temperature is right around 73 degrees. That have moved back out. They're kind of post-spawn. They're feeding heavily on shad and on ledges, secondary points. Your bigger fish are out there in that deeper water. Crappie, they've all kind of moved back out. You still might catch some up shallow, but out deeper on the ledges, using minnows would be productive for your white crappie. Bluegill, red ear, they've kind of moved back out, but still biting on red worms and crickets, fishing under a bobber. Catfish are starting to pick up, fishing on night crawlers, or going out to the river channels, fishing for blue cats, using some cut bait or some big chunks of night crawler. Well, this is Paul Reister, and I hope you find a good day to go fishing.
I sail home on peaceful water.
Kentucky has some troubled waters.
Sailing in a sewer all the way.
Boaters dumping waste overboard when no one's looking ruins the day for everyone, fish included. So use an approved dump station.
Sailing in a sewer all the day.
Dilution is not the solution. Use your holding tank wisely, or hold it in. A message from your Kentucky wildlife and boating officers.
My life changed forever when I was 13. That's the day a drunk boater ran me over.
Sober boating saves more than lives.
It saves doctor visits. It saves the pain of a mother. It saves nightmares. It saves time in lawyers' offices. It saves stares everywhere I go. It saves a billion awkward situations. It saves endless surgeries. What are you looking at? Sober boating could have saved me. So don't drink and boat.
Kentucky Boating and Conservation officers remind you, sober boating saves lives. Baglin back on Kentucky Afield Radio. Have you been to a petting zoo? How about an area where there are alpacas, camels, and other odd pastured creatures? We've seen nature centers such as the Salado Center that has raptors. Holding captive wildlife comes with its own set of rules and regulations. And it's not for everyone. Terry Brunges, who's a wildlife biologist with the Department of Fish and Wildlife, specializes in granting permits to hold wildlife somewhere other than the friendly confines of nature. Terry, thanks for your time.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Permitting for animals is something I really don't know. You know, the closest I would come to that is my dog would need a permit, or he'd need a license, or he'd need something on his collar. But how does that apply, permitting, to wild animals?
Fish and Wildlife is basically, we have authority to handle wildlife, whether it be exotic wildlife or native wildlife, that anything that comes into or through the state, we basically need to know about it. There's some disease issues, there's dangerous animals, we just need to know. So
would that apply to farm animals or zoo animals?
Farm animals are exempt. We have a permit exempt list. Camels are exempt. Parrots are exempt. You know, some of your usual pet store animals, as well as gerbils, alpacas, bison, goats. Those are ag animals.
And if I went to the zoo and there was lions and tigers there, does that have to go through State Fish and Wildlife as well?
Yes, except if they are in a accredited zoo by the American Zoo and Aquarium Association. If they're an accredited zoo, they have the right to handle their own animals. They've basically been given, because of their accreditation, they are able to have inherently dangerous animals without permits.
Why would somebody need an animal that would require a permit?
Well, for the most part, the general public does not need to own or possess wildlife, because wildlife aren't pets. They don't do well in an environment like a domestic animal.
Yeah, they're not domestic at all.
They're wild. There are situations such as circuses that have lions and tigers and elephants and stuff like that. So Fish and Wildlife is responsible for making sure that those circuses comply with state laws to protect the public. Lions and tigers are considered inherently dangerous. They're prohibited species. There are some circumstances where an exemption can be granted for specific reasons to allow them in the states, such as a lawfully operated circus.
I have heard in the news in recent years there was a snow leopard or white tiger or something that was in this state and somehow got free from its handlers. And Fish and Wildlife, I know, and Dr. Stasiak had a hand in trying to chase that animal down.
Luckily for me, I have not had any instances where we've had escaped inherently dangerous animals, but I'm just waiting for the day.
It's going to happen.
It's going to happen, unfortunately.
Inherently dangerous. That's a term that's used by state officials. What is on that list of inherently dangerous animals?
Well, alligators, crocodiles, lions, tigers, bears, cheetahs, elephants are considered inherently dangerous, and then we have venomous snake species, wolverines, and any hybrids of that species as well.
So we have venomous snakes, and they're deadly in this state, 4 of those.
Yes.
But they're okay to live in the wild in the state?
Yes.
And as far as bears, black bears, they live naturally here.
Yes. They're considered native wildlife. Our 4 species of venomous snakes and our black bears, they are native wildlife, but they are also prohibited wildlife as far as keeping them.
So bringing in a Kodiak bear or a polar bear or grizzly bear...
No, it's going to probably eat you. So, yes, that's prohibited. You hear all these stories about people keeping alligators in their bathtubs, and if we find out about it, we're going to confiscate that animal. And you're going to, 1, lose your animal, and you're going to face fines.
A facility like the Salado Wildlife Education Center in Frankfort has many animals, bald eagle among them. Now, that eagle could not survive on its own in the wild. Is there a classification out there that maybe falls under your purview as an educational animal?
They do. The federal government does have educational permits for birds that cannot be released, such as the bald eagle you're talking about. That way they can live out their life and be of use. But yeah, they would never make it back in the wild. Wildlife rehabbers do keep some educational animals that cannot be released, but there are specific requirements that basically say that animal cannot survive on its own. And it does have to meet specific requirements, such as loss of a leg or blind in one eye. You can't just say, it can't make it on its own because it's so attached to me. That it has specific requirements.
My cousin in Cincinnati, this is another state, so I don't know what laws apply elsewhere. They had a monkey. And to me, when I was a little kid, that seemed, that's cool. But as I grow up, maybe that monkey would rather be in a tree, maybe, rather than in that cage. Do we have an ordinance against monkeys in the state?
We actually do. Monkeys are also considered inherently dangerous. 1, because they can transfer some pretty deadly diseases to humans. And 2, they can bite, and they are very strong. And you're right, monkeys in a tree. Monkeys are highly social animals. They're very intelligent, and they need to live with a group of their own kind. And when they're taken out of that environment and put in a pet, it's just really not fair to them. As they mature, they become very agitated. They can't live on their own. They can't forage. They can't breed. They can't find food. They can't hide from predators. They can't do anything but sit in your house. So they become agitated, and they start attacking the smallest individual in the house, maybe the family dog. Then they go after the child. Then they go after mom. And lastly, they go after Dad. It's a very dangerous situation. I wanted one as a child, too. I remember in a pet store, and there was a monkey for sale, and I begged my dad to get it for me. I really wanted it. It was an adorable little capuchin monkey. And, I didn't know any better.
I've been to a lot of pet stores. I don't see these creatures anymore.
No, you should not see monkeys in pet stores in Kentucky because they are illegal.
What's the most common issue that comes across your desk in the permitting field?
I think one of the most common issues with me is people wanting foxes and raccoons as pets. And once I talk to them, hopefully I change most of their minds. Everyone loves raccoons. They're cute, they're mischievous, but most people don't understand the dangers associated with having a pet raccoon.
What are they?
Rabies, for one. If you get scratched by your pet raccoon, then you're going to have to get rabies vaccinations, let alone if it bites you. But if you get scratched or bit, and then oftentimes they'll want to test that raccoon for rabies, and they have to kill it to test it, so you lose the raccoon. So a lot of people that keep these raccoons illegally don't realize the damage they're doing to the animal, let alone they're taking it out of its natural environment. It's a very unhappy animal.
Are there domestic geese?
Yes, there are domestic geese.
I remember once I was at a yard sale. This was many years ago. A nice neighborhood. I went into the garage, and lo and behold, there was like a big dog cage that had a goose in it. I don't know if it was wild. It didn't look like a Canada goose, but I knew it was a goose. To this day, I often wondered, why'd you have a goose? I don't think I asked the homeowners, but it just struck me as odd.
Probably because they went to a farm supply store and took their kids, and there were baby ducklings or baby geese there. And I had a baby duck when I was little, and its name was Ducky Lucky, and we kept it until it became a big white duck, and we realized it needed to be on a farm pond. So
can't resist.
Take them home. Yeah, can't resist them.
Well, how about a mountain goat from Wyoming?
You are not allowed to transport a wild hoofed animal into Kentucky. So a wild mountain goat would not be allowed.
How about a gray jay from California? You're allowed to have that and just keep it as if it were a parakeet?
No, not unless you have a federal permit. If you're talking about a migratory bird outside of invasive species, then you have to have a federal permit.
You're going through the paperwork there, and Terry, it sounds like it might be more trouble than it's worth. Is that the message that maybe we're getting from this?
Yes. Here at Fish and Wildlife, we really believe that wildlife is supposed to be wild. It is not a pet. You know, I spend every day talking to people about wildlife is supposed to be wild. I had a lady that called. She'd kept a squirrel that she'd found that had fallen out of its nest in a tree, and she kept it for 6 months. And she turned it loose and didn't understand why it was not afraid of the neighbor's cat. If she had taken it to a rehabber immediately, that rehabber could have taken care of it and released it without habituating it to humans. But the squirrel didn't know any better. And I had to explain to her that she can't keep it as a pet because it's illegal. She has to turn it loose, but because she habituated it to humans, it didn't have a chance. Because it didn't even know that a cat was dangerous.
Mm-hmm. Didn't realize cat's a predator.
It didn't.
What's your advice as we close the segment? For anyone who sees anything out of the ordinary, maybe as I did at that yard sale where I saw that goose, any animal that's like being held, it appears out of place. What's your advice?
I would advise them to call Fish and Wildlife. I mean, you can call 1-800-858-1549, 8 to 4:30, or you can call 1-800-25-ALERT after hours. Especially if it's a dangerous animal, we really need to know about it. And people are keeping wildlife as pets illegally, then we need to know about that too. Wildlife are not pets. They need to be in the wild, and we need to enjoy them without infringing upon them.
Terry, thanks a million for coming out.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
In our final few minutes on the show on incidental contact with wildlife, something that could be happening at your house right now and you not really even know it. Nuisance wildlife that wants to live in your attic or your garage. We knock on Vicki Raw's door next on Kentucky Afield Radio. Charlie Baglin, Kentucky Afield Radio. Back with our final few minutes on the show, we have called Incidental Contact and how wildlife crosses our paths in sometimes unsuspecting ways. We end the show with an issue we face commonly. An animal where an animal shouldn't be. In our garage, in our basement. Vicki Raw is a nuisance wildlife control operator. She is in northern Kentucky. Vicki, some critters come into our house for the very same reason that we do. They're simply looking for a place to live. What's the attraction?
Most of our jobs are in a suburban or an urban environment. Most folks in the country don't have this problem, but if I were a raccoon or a squirrel, I would much rather live in your attic than in a hole in a tree. Or if I was a skunk, I would much rather live under your porch, you know, the porch, the dirt under the porch settles and under the sidewalk. So it's kind of like a nice cozy cave under there. The temperature stays pretty good winter and summer. So we have just created much nicer habitat than what Mother Nature already had for them, much more comfortable habitat, I should say, than what Mother Nature provided. So we're inviting them in. We're not stealing their habitat so much as just creating a more comfortable place to live.
Well, I guess just like we do, they see our home as their home. But the conflict is we like our dwelling to be exclusively ours.
Well, and not only that, but once they live there, once they've established themselves, they get a fidelity to that place, and they're going to fight for it. They're very, very persistent. I say that about all wildlife that enters a home, from a bat to a starling to a squirrel. They think, what business is it of us to try to get them out? So if we just seal the entry hole when they're outside, they're just going to chew in or break in somewhere else. So removing the violating animal is important, as well as doing a very, very good repair job.
Okay, we're quick to blame the animal, but the animal is just doing what he thinks is right. But for the most part, we like critters bouncing through the yard. In fact, we will put out bird seed and make feeding stations for the animals. But in some cases, are we just doing that as a prelude to a conflict?
When you have a person that feeds the animals, when you have a feeder, they're doing that because they like to see the animals. They don't have the understanding that Mother Nature can sustain these animals. There's plenty of food out there for them. So what they're doing is they're throwing the peanuts out or whatever they're giving them, and it's oftentimes peanuts with squirrels. And that's drawing them closer and closer because it's easier to pick up a peanut than to go, dig your acorn up from last season. And that gets them more and more comfortable with us, and that gets them closer and more comfortable to our homes, especially in a suburban or urban environment. And yeah, once they're closer, they have less fear of us, then your house is just the next step.
What's your advice? Can we do A, B, and C and try to rid ourselves of some headache?
We do that for folks all the time. Our motto is, we don't want you to have to hire us and spend your money on wildlife again. So when we go to a home or a building, any structure, we're looking for anything that's at risk, anything that's vulnerable or a sensitive area on that structure, and we can tell the folks, we can either do a little bit of a repair and preventative work, or here's what we recommend you watch out for. We'd prefer to take care of it now rather than you have to call us back later. Like I said, we use a lot of sheet metal. We rarely repair with wood. Another vulnerable spot is your soffit vents. Oftentimes folks have that screened soffit vent. Window screen is a welcome mat for any animal, whether it's behind a gable louver vent or in a soffit. They know that that's just a matter of minutes before they can chew or push through that.
Let me take you on a trip to my front porch, because I've often looked at this burrow that is under my front porch. I don't know what's under there. I don't know what made it. I never see anything coming and going, and I'm wondering, should I block it off?
Yeah, and we get that call a lot. And oftentimes it's right where the steps go up and next to the porch, and sometimes it's a burrowed hole under the sidewalk even. But every day we get a call about a hole at the front porch, and the first thing I do tell them is what you alluded to: don't block it off. It could be that it's not being used at this time. More often than not, though, it is. Even if an animal made that hole and abandoned it, you have animals that are opportunists that are going to take advantage of that. So what we do is we can advise the customer, and if they don't want to get their hands dirty, we can go out and do it. We use a wildlife indicator, perhaps some sticks laid over it, half an inch apart. By putting a wildlife indicator up, whether it's a burrowed hole or a chewed hole in a house, that tells us the whole story. We can tell if it's being used. Our rule of thumb on most times of the year, not for the middle of winter, is if we or you put your wildlife indicator up and it stays good for 7 days, you can repair it or fill it in. Unless it's in the very cold of winter, most animals will not hole up more than 3 or 4 days, but I've had animals hole up for 6. And that's the most I've ever had them stay inside without coming out during normal temperatures.
Sometimes accidents happen. Doors are left open. A bird flies in. Now, that's enough to make a lot of people freak.
If it's a bird, for example, turn off the lights. Even if it's during the daytime, turn off any lights and open the nearest window or door. And get out of that room. Kind of maybe be able to watch, but get out of that room and be still. The bird's going to be just as panicked as the homeowner is, and the bird would prefer not to be there, so he really wants to go outside. Open that door or that window, keep the room calm and as dim as possible, and, that animal will leave more often than not.
Let's say someone needs your services, and maybe they're not in northern Kentucky. Maybe they're in Morgantown or Paintsville or Somerset, wherever they are in the state. What do they put in Google to find help?
NUCOA, the National Wildlife Control Operators Association, if you go to their site, you can click on your state and find wildlife control operators that belong to NUCOA, which is the organization that tries to educate wildlife control operators. And then next to their name, they will indicate, for example, if they're a certified wildlife control operator, which is somebody who has gone through a much more rigorous amount of education. So the CWCP, the Certified Wildlife Control Operator, is someone that you know that has gone above and beyond and has educated themselves and their company and their staff, keep trying to know the latest and the greatest techniques to use.
Enlightening conversation. Vicki Roth, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you. Thank you a lot. It was a pleasure.
Next time a critter comes a little close for comfort, do yourself and the animal a favor and resist the temptation to tame the wild. We are out of time. This is Charlie Baglin inviting you to join us in a week, and we'll go inside, outdoors again, here on Kentucky Afield Radio.